So I'm going to dive right in, and I've cut out some of my slides to get right to the good stuff. My goal today is to show you how my team and how we help organizations pull data out of Razor's Edge NXT and Financial Edge NXT and push that into a reporting data warehouse to make it really easy to use Power BI to work with updated data and refresh that data down to hourly if necessary. So we're going to show you really how we do what we do. And so if some of you want to take this on and do it yourself, then have at it. And so we'll hope you get some value out of this session. I'm going to cut off my video just while I share, just to protect my bandwidth. I'm going to go ahead and get right in. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to start with a few slides, and then we're going to get right to the good stuff. So we're talking about really how to get data out of the system. And I want to make sure that everyone can see my screen. I just saw a note that said this can only be viewed by the host and the co-host.
Yeah, well, I can. If any participants can't, raise your hand, shout a verbal something, throw a line out in the chat.
That's right. Let us know.
Cannot. Okay. So let's see what we can do. I know we ran into this in a different call, Barton. Hold on. And try it now.
Fingers crossed. I'm not seeing the message this time. Oh, wait, I am seeing it. Participants can see your screen. Was that better?
Looks like it.
Awesome. Okay. So, quick introduction myself. I was with Blackball starting in about 97. Spent 20 plus years there with a focus on Financial Edge and Razor's Edge. And a number of years ago, started a group called npAutomate, where we help organizations achieve whether you want to call it digital transformation or process automation, leveraging all these great opportunities with the Sky API and the Microsoft Power Platform. So excited to be with you today. A quick rundown of why nonprofits are embracing Power BI. I think every organization is unique. If we kind of start on the far right and you're tracking different things that are relevant for your organization that are key and critical, and where BI can be really beneficial and impactful to you is that it can take that information and present it to the folks that need it in the format that they need it in an instant way. And it might be joining data from multiple systems. We've implemented solutions, for example, where we're joining event revenue to event expenses between Razor's Edge and Financial Edge, and putting that into one report to let people kind of consume all that information together, or even introducing other pieces. I won't belabor that this slide. I think you understand some of the reasons why this may be of value. And I think the question is, how do we get to the data? One of the first things we like to think about is consider any other data sources that you do want to get to. If you're a Razor's Edge NXT user, that's going to be of value. If you also have Financial Edge NXT, there's some benefit in getting that out into Power BI. In addition to anything else that you might want to join together, as long as we have some commonality or some way of keeping track of a record ID between a couple of systems, whether it's using a custom field or something else, then those pieces can all be joined together within reporting. So be sure to think about anything else that you may want to interact with. Some of the ways that we've helped organizations consume BI reporting is most predominantly within either Microsoft Teams within a channel, or within Blackball NXT by embedding these reports and getting to them from the home page, or within a constituent record or a gift record or a project record on the accounting side. But some folks might want to use a Power BI app or just link to a website to be able to consume the reports. A quick just note, if you're a little bit new to this, is that you can take advantage of Power BI nonprofit pricing. You do want Power BI Pro. It's typically around $3 per user per month. And we're going to be highlighting using Power Automate to get bulk data out today for Power BI, and that requires a Power Automate per user license, at least for the person that's creating and running this process, not for everyone that'll be consuming the reports. They just need the Power BI Pro option. I always like to start off with a quick slide of just showing you what's possible. We're going to be really focused in on Razor's Edge and Financial Edge and XT today, and we're going to stay in this lane. So we're really going to be right in here in this area today. There are built-in Power BI connectors that Blackbaud has on their site for RE and FE, but they're not really kept up to date, and it's not really ideal. There's not all the fields you need, and if you have a decent amount of data, it's just not a great way to do it. Whereas what we're going to focus on today is showing you the approach we typically take, and we think it's highly recommended, and that's to use an Azure SQL database, not a data lake or anything too expensive or fancy, but just honestly a small Azure SQL database, and push all the data into that database, either new data or iterative updates of data throughout the day, so we can keep and we can ensure that when you display Power BI reports to users, they're getting information that's being updated, say, down to an hourly basis. And then again, those reports can be embedded within the solution. So we're going to stay right here today and show you some of the methods we use to get that data out. So a couple quick examples, like I mentioned earlier about kind of comparing revenues and expenses of events, for example. This is a solution we developed for an organization where they wanted to be able to see both, and they run a lot of events and wanted to keep a handle on what did the revenue side look like versus the expense side that they may want to monitor. In addition to this being a report that's embedded in Razor's Edge or accessible from the homepage of Razor's Edge, they also have the ability to drill down to the event record. In their case, the event and the appeal is kind of one and the same. It's almost a one-to-one. But by drilling to the event record, you get even more information using custom tiles. So these are also just Power BI displays. Sometimes people we can also leverage Power Apps to display these things, but these are just simple Power BI views of that data showing here's the event revenue for this single event on the record itself using a custom tile, event expenses, how many registered, how many attended. You could show cost per participant, and so on, and then provide a drill down in Razor's Edge of all the transactions that add up to the expenses. So Blackbaud's got great documentation on the developer side of once you get this Power BI report developed, how to get it onto the different pages and how to display it. But again, we're going to be really focused on getting the data today. Just a couple of other quick examples of the types of information that people may be displaying and how you can kind of make it work for your organization. But you just want to think about what's most relevant, some of the information that needs to be at someone's fingertips, and then just make sure that they can get to that either from within Razor's Edge and XT, from Teams or Financial Edge or anywhere else. In this case, the organization was using some specific coding on the GIF to break out different types of departments and then tracking those against goals, which is actually, I think, tracked within SharePoint or something like that because there wasn't a good home for that within Razor's Edge. And then finally, in terms of where these things can be presented, I showed you a moment ago how we could see this on a record, but these are also accessible from the homepage, either the homepage of Razor's Edge or Financial Edge. So here's an example of a report that's showing program-related data for specific types of constituents based on certain constituent codes. And so you can either display it as a tile, as a pop-up where it goes to full screen, or even as a flyout from the right in order to get to more information. So without further ado, what does it take to actually get that data out of NXT into an Azure SQL database utilizing the Sky API? So we'll walk through the three main steps to get this process started, and then I'll show you in detail how we're approaching this. As we go through these next few slides, I did not get my PowerPoint turned in time, but feel free to email me. I'll show you my email at the end of the meeting, and happy to send over these slides. And in addition to some of the code snippets we do to do the SQL inserts and the SQL updates, to get the data in either initially or to do refreshes of the data throughout the day.
And Barton,
yep.
I don't know if it's happening for everyone else. People can stir in chat if it is. Every couple of minutes, your audio like switches devices. It's like one time we kind of a headset and then a laptop and then something else. So it feels like 1 second it'll be loud, then it'll be quiet. So I don't know if that's what's happening, but I wanted to give you a heads up.
Thank you for that. I don't have other devices. I just turned off Bluetooth on my phone, but I will lean in just to make sure that I'm speaking clearly. So thank you for that. So as I just highlighted, if I can provide this PowerPoint after the meeting or any of these code snippets that we're going to show you on how to do SQL inserts.
And Barton, now we can't hear you at all.
Still can't hear
me? No, it's as if you're hundreds of feet away.
I hear you clear as a bell.
Nope.
So still can't hear me.
Still can't hear you. It may be best since I'm a host, it shouldn't leave the meeting if you want to drop and come back.
Okay, let me try that. My apologies to everyone. I'm going to leave the meeting and come right back in.
And apologies to all attendees. Welcome to remote meetings, which I'm sure everyone is used to at this point. But what I would say is nice is I haven't had to tell anyone that they are talking while on mute yet. So that is a bonus.
Now that I'm unmuted, is this any different?
You are much better.
Oh, thank goodness. Well, thank goodness we have you here to let me know if I'm off. So please speak up if that happens again. And I'm going to get right to the good stuff. Share. And so again, as I mentioned, I'm happy to send this over to folks. I think I already saw a few comments in the chat. So, the first thing we need to do is get set up. We use Microsoft Power Platform for a lot of organizations and actually embed these flows within their environment. We can also, some organizations prefer that we use Logic Apps, and Logic Apps is a completely the same as Power Automate. So you can really use either one based on your security constraints. And in terms of the Azure SQL Database, that can leverage MFA and Active Directory. So you can build as much security around that as you want, or you can just have a username and a password for the database. One thing that's important to note is that based on the size of most databases and organizations that we work with, really the DTU-based SQL database, either basic or standard, is really all that someone needs. So it's going to be anywhere from like $5 to $15 a month to be able to, set up and utilize the SQL database within Azure. And, from there, you can actually get to that data within SQL Server Management Studio, just like as if it was a local database. It's really straightforward. So, in addition to these setup requirements, we get into identifying data. We need to figure out what it is you want to pull out of Razor's Edge and Financial Edge. And so we'll walk you through that in just a moment of kind of how to figure that out. We like to use a JSON viewer within various websites to just better understand your data as opposed to just looking at the schemas on the Blackbaud developer website. And then the next step is to go ahead and create those tables within SQL for things that you need. You're going to have a constituent table, a gift table. Within the gift table, you're going to have splits, perhaps, or soft credits as child tables. A project table, a GL transaction table. So just think about what it is you need to report on, and that'll help kind of figure out, which flows you need to develop to push data into SQL on a recurring basis. And then we're heavy users of the SQL Query V2 action within either Power Automate or Logic Apps. So we'll give you a sense of kind of how that works. Most endpoints will give you 5,000 at a time, with the exception of a few FE endpoints. And so you'll insert the first 5,000 records, but if you have 1 million, then we'll just keep looping through and until we get to the end. And we'll talk about how to do iterative updates in the cases where you've got a lot of records and you just don't want to reload every single time. So let's get over to it and take a look at an example. I'm going to highlight GL transactions in this specific example, but this can apply to any section of Razor's Edge or Financial Edge that you need to pull data for. In a lot of cases, especially on the Razor's Edge side, you've got built-in connectors, as part of the Blackbaud published connection points that you can utilize, whether you're trying to pull a list of constituents or a list of gifts. Those are predefined. So you don't have to do anything fancy there. You can just go to Blackbaud constituents and pull your constituent list and use that to just iterate through, say, 5,000 at a time and get everything you need. But it doesn't work for everything. Like if you need custom fields, you can only get it per constituent. So you actually have to choose the constituent that you're getting it for. Well, that's not ideal if you have 1 million constituents. The same is true of relationships, or the same is true of constituent codes. So in those cases, historically, we would develop custom connectors for organizations. But now with the advent of the Sky add-in HTTP connector that Blackbaud has rolled out, this has become much, much more straightforward and still is part of the the built-in Blackbaud endpoints that are available. So as long as you connect your environment to Power Platform, these Sky add-ins are also there for both RENXT, FENXT, and every single other Sky API endpoint that's been published by Blackbaud. So any of the REST APIs are accessible through this send an HTTP request. So I wanted to walk through an example that utilized that one as opposed to one of the built-in options, because it gives you a chance to see how to get really everything that you're going to be grabbing. And so we use this same set of steps, whether we're pulling transactions or all the custom fields to put in a table, or all the constituent codes or all the relationships or anything within Financial Edge, because there's not a published connector. So you always start by a get. Obviously, we're pulling data, and you want to go over to the Blackbaud section of that endpoint that you're trying to grab data for, and this will give you the path of what you want to grab. In this case, we're pasting that into the get to grab what we need. But if you want to put in other filters, like you only want to grab the last 4 years of data, you can always use that based on a from date. We do use the offset and the limit, but this provides you the detail that you can always utilize to see what it is you need to grab. In our case, we're going ahead and setting up an offset of 0, because even though I have a very small collection of records, a lot of times that's not the case, where people have thousands or hundreds of thousands of records. So we need to be able to keep track of the offset so we can keep running this. In addition, we want to put in a limit so we get the max we can get, which in this case is 5,000. And we're good to go. We're going to get the data out of the system. Now, what we recommend before you go and build a table in SQL is to just run that by itself and see what the result looks like. And so, terminate's a great option just to stop a process halfway through. So let me save this and try to run it. And hopefully the demo gods are working with me today, and this should work very quickly. This endpoint seems to run really quickly too, regardless of what we're looking at. But we want to get the results. Now, if you have a large number of results, you'll click a button to view the results and it'll open it up and do another tile. But I've got a really small sample database. I'm just going to hit Control A. And then what I think is a really good practice is to use some viewer to be able to look at your data and get a sense of the types of information you want to pull out, because you may not need every single field that's included here. So we like this JSON viewer .stack.hu, but it's completely up to you what you prefer to use. But what this allows you to do is to visualize your data and also see what Blackbaud is calling these different fields, because the schemas that they publish on the developer site may not always be up to date. And so this gives you a really clear sense of nested arrays like transaction codes and other pieces. And from here, you can determine what you want. You may not need everything. So, you can be somewhat specific on what you want to pull out of the system in order to grab what you need. At that point, we can leverage that to create a table within SQL. So I'm going to pull this terminate back down to get it out of the way so we can run this later. And I went ahead and left in this demonstration how we typically create the tables. We typically create them, again, just using the SQL query v2 option, connecting to the SQL database, and then creating a table and defining, the names of the values that you want and the type of table entry that it is. But you could just as easily create these within SQL or within SQL Server Management Studio. So, this is the table that we initially created to build out these results. And typically, when we implement this, we just grab everything and send it over. But again, you can be more specific in terms of what you want to grab. But this action called SQL Server Query v2 is really useful to either insert information, create tables, or do anything else that you may want to do. So we get that out of the way. We've built a table, and so now we're ready to load all of our transactions into that table, or all of our items, whether it's custom fields for Razor's Edge, or constituent codes, or anything else. What we typically do, because this is kind of the initialization, kind of the first time you run it, or even a complete refresh that we may run on a weekly basis or something like that for an organization. So we'll start by just truncating, which is just basically clearing out that table as a starting point so we can reload all the transactions. We'll talk about how to do updates to an existing table in a moment, but this is in order to do a full reload. So again, it's using the SQL query action, and then we use the SQL query action again. And just to show you exactly what we're using, if you type SQL and you choose SQL Server, this execute a SQL query v2 is really ideal to be able to do these different pieces. So we've got the data from the records. We've got that output that we just looked at. Now, some folks like to use a parse JSON to kind of, get the data out, but you don't really have to, because we're doing a bulk insert. And so in terms of this insert, we use a function called OpenJSON in order to grab the data that we just got from the Sky API and push it into those different rows within that table. Again, happy to send you this code snippet if you'd like, if you'll just email me after the call. But we're embedding the value of the output. So, whether it's get records and then give me all the values. So give me 5,000 values. And here's the fields that we want. This is what this is what it's called within our database table. And then this is what it's called within the JSON. And so we're just inputting all these different values into the table 5,000 at a time. And it takes max 1 to 2 seconds to do this for each iteration. So really quick to pull that information out and put it into the system. And again, a parse JSON is not required. What we typically do then is pull a count of that information. So we want to count how many records we have. And then we want to increment the offset. So if it is greater than 5,000, we need to do it again, or maybe we need to do it 100 times. And so within this condition, if the offset is less than or equal to that count that we just looked at, then we're going to continue to loop through and get more records. And this is the exact same ask as before, but now the offset is at 5,000 the next time we run it. Then the offset will be at 10,000 the next time we run it, then at 15,000. And the insert is identical. It's just referencing get records to versus get records. So that's the only difference within this ask. So if I save this and run it, again, we'll see if this actually works. And since I only have 340 transactions, this is going to work really fast. But even with volume, this process runs very quickly. Now, if you do have a lot of records, I don't recommend running this over and over throughout the day. And that's where we'll cover how to do updates in addition to this. But ran very quickly. It gave me those 374 records, and then we asked for just the values. And we did an insert after truncating the table, and we pushed all those values into SQL. So after a full reload, I should have the same values that I had before because I hadn't changed anything. And we get those same 374 records, with all the fields that you need in that table. So that's really all it takes to get the data out and get it into SQL by using first creating the table, then truncating the table if it's already got data in it, and then inserting the values using this open JSON. There's tons of documentation related to this on the web, but also happy to send you a little snippet of how we do that. You can adapt that to other endpoints that you want to use it for. So that covers transactions. Couple other examples I wanted to pull up is, at this point, we want to be able to connect Power BI to that SQL database. That's quite straightforward. It's really just a matter of going into Power BI Desktop as a starting point, choosing Get Data, selecting SQL Server, putting in your credentials, the name of the server, which is typically like a web address. In my case, it's called npProject databasewindows.net or something like that. Then choosing the database and putting in your credentials, whether that's Active Directory or MFA or just a username and password. And that gets you the data that you need. What's impactful, I think, with the SQL option and using Azure SQL is it's really easy to refresh that information online. I've never seen that message before, so I'm just going to write that off to something with the demo. So in order to publish this online, you just want to connect to your Azure SQL Online and then click Publish to push it up to the Power BI service. At that point, you can schedule refreshes to take place throughout the day. In addition to, you can share it to other users. So one of the things you want to think about is make sure you don't put it like in your own workspace. You want to put it within a shared workspace or a workspace you create that you are going to share, because then you can manage access to determine who else can see this report that we just produced within the system that we just uploaded. In addition to, you can schedule that refresh of how often you want to refresh that report. And so for organizations that want to have this, up to the hour, you just want to separate this from the Power Automate load. So maybe you update data at the bottom of the hour and you refresh the report at the top of the hour, throughout the day by adding, various times of your business day. So that kind of helps break up the difference between refreshing your data and updating your report for people to be able to see it down to the hour, which if any of you have worked with like database backups from Blackbaud, that's nightly. So this gets a lot more fresh in terms of how up to date the data is in that case. So that's what we got to here, was creating the shared workspace online, save and publish that information to a shared workspace, and then schedule the refresh. So this works for a lot of things where you don't have a lot of data, or if you have 100,000 records, even these things are going to work fine. For things like funds in RE, or campaigns or appeals, or sometimes custom fields depending on count, it may be fine just to do full reloads each time using what we've already showed you. But, if an organization, and we work with some that have millions of gift records, or millions of transactions, or millions of custom fields, or, hundreds of thousands of custom fields, that's not really appropriate because the processes just take too long. It's not really an issue with hitting API limits. It's just, it just takes a really long time, and you want to keep these databases fresh. So as we get over to scheduling these Power Automate flows, for the smaller ones that only take a minute or two to run, just changing that first step to a schedule and just telling it to run, say, at the bottom of each hour is going to be fine. But for the larger data sets, what we like to do is incorporate what we call iterative updates. So use the last modified and just grab any constituents that have changed to push to the constituent table, whether it's a new constituent or whether it's an updated address on a constituent, or any gifts that have changed, or any transactions that have changed. So that helps ensure that you're not having to reload the data every single time. You're just running through those iterative updates to get the latest data in. And again, we just use a SQL query in addition to staging tables to do that. So a lot of times when we set this up for organizations to get them started to start BI reporting, we'll take a look at the bigger tables like transactions and like gifts and set up what we call staging tables. So the real difference in that case is, instead of having that initial load, which we just reviewed, we have other loads that are either called iterative or update, where we capture the changes. Sorry, let me get over to this. Get to the right screen. Everything seems to run slower when I'm in a meeting. I don't know why. So instead of having the GL transaction initial load, where we just grab everything and pull it in and start with an empty table, now we're just grabbing the latest things that have happened. So whether you're in Razor's Edge or whether you're in Financial Edge, you always have the option to use the date modified or the last modified field. If you look back at, the endpoint that you're looking at, whether it's, again, those others we talked about, like custom fields in RE or constituent codes or anything else, you're always going to have that last modified as an option when you're pulling a list of all codes that you want to see. So the real difference in this specific example is that, first off, we've got to get a date going. And there's a lot of ways to do this. It's really based on how often you're refreshing it. In this example, I'm just refreshing it nightly. So all I'm really doing in this first step is converting my time zone over to Eastern time. And then the next step, I'm just subtracting a day from that. So even though it says add days, you'll see the -1 there, which is subtracting a day. Most of the time for organizations, we use add hours and then maybe subtract 4 hours, 3 hours, something like that, to just go ahead and make sure we're picking up anything that has changed since the last update. And if you're running this every hour, I still think it's a good practice to go back 2 or 3 hours, because there's no downside to grabbing the same stuff over and over again, as you're going to see with the next steps. So the first thing we do is we create a staging table that is identical to the main table. In this case, we have a transaction staging table, which is only going to pick up the changes that happen every time we run this. The next step is almost identical to what we had before, with the exception of we're inputting a last modified. So we're grabbing everything that's been modified, in this case, since yesterday's date timestamp. And then the insert is just like it was before, but we're putting it into the staging table. We do this to help us to make it easier to get this information from staging into the live table that we're using, because the system can then either update existing rows or it can insert new rows using another SQL query that we can incorporate. And so if we need to, if 100,000 constituents have been changed in the last day because of some mass import that was done, maybe it's more than 5,000. So we need to loop through and make sure we pick up all the other changes that have been made. Again, load all of those changes into that same staging table. And when we're done with that, the secret sauce to this approach is using a merge SQL statement within SQL. So again, the same SQL action as we had before, but using this particular command, we're able to say, okay, let's merge all the data into our target, which is the GL transaction, from our staging table. And first, we're going to say, when you match the distribution ID, so think about whatever it is you're pushing in and what is kind of the primary key, or what is that unique field. For constituents, it's that constituent system record ID. For gifts, it's that gift record ID, not the constituent lookup ID or the gift lookup ID. So think about that field that is 100% unique, typically an auto-counting integer within Blackbaud. And that's what you want to filter on or to join on as a target. And so when it matches, when it finds that value within your existing data set, whether you have 100,000 records or 3 million records, it's just going to update that row with a new address or a new status, in this case, that the transaction is posted. But if it doesn't find that match, then it will insert a new row. So taking this approach, it gives us the ability to do just that. Pick up any changes on an hourly basis without having to run through and reload everything in the system, but just get those latest changes by using this merge, insert, update capability. So yesterday I went and posted a journal entry. And so hopefully this will get picked up and load in, and give it a second to run. And the same thing that happened last time, with the exception of this merge. At the end of the merge, we kind of asked for an audit report so we could see what was being loaded in. So as you look at the end of it, it'll say, okay, we picked up 8 records that changed, which is completely in agreement with the records that we pulled. So we got 8 records based on that date parameter. And so at the bottom, we're either going to insert new rows or we're going to update existing rows. Well, since I've already run this process, these are just all straight updates. Sometimes you'll see where it'll update a handful of these, and then there'll be, 3 or 4 or 10 inserts at the bottom. So these 10 records were changed and these 5 were inserted. So you get a chance to see all that in addition to a count. So as part of that SQL statement, we were also asking for, more clarity around these results. So that's a really effective way to update a table by using a staging table and then having it either update an existing row or create a new row within the transactions. So that covers most of what we do, regardless of the endpoint with Blackbaud NXT, whether it's Razor's Edge, Financial Edge, or any other Blackbaud Sky API published endpoint. The only thing you want to consider at that, as the next step is, what about deletions? Well, if you do a full refresh, that'll pick up a deletion. In some cases, we also utilize the webhook to pick up deletions of records. But in some cases, maybe you do the hourly refresh to get the latest iterative updates, and then maybe a full refresh nightly or weekly to go ahead and pick up those deletions, depending on how you want to capture those. So you can really take either approach to get to that last step. So I did a little better on time today. And so I want to give you a chance again to see my email address. If I can send you any of this information, I'm happy to. It's barton.dyson@npAutomate.com. If you prefer to really focus on Power BI and spend less time on this development of getting the data there and getting all the different pieces for you to access, we're happy to get this part in place for you within your Power Automate or within your Logic Apps environment. Another thing we like to do is set up views to make it just a little bit easier to work with. Certainly you can join all these tables together within Power BI, but as you know, like a gift endpoint, it'll give you the constituent record ID, but it won't give you the name or other relevant information. So sometimes joining those together within a view based on what people want to report on can be
quite handy.